I'm Audrey Miller, 36 years old, and for over a decade, I served my country in missions so classified they didn't even have names. 4 years ago, I was erased, my records sealed, my honor stripped, and my name buried under someone else's lie. Then last week, I showed up at my sister's wedding, uninvited and forgotten. I thought I'd just sit quietly in the back, but when I saw him, Victor Thorne, the man who wrote me out of history, something inside me clicked. By the end of the night, he was in handcuffs, and I was finally visible. Before I tell you exactly how it all unraveled, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever been pushed aside by the people who should have stood by you, like this and subscribe. You need to hear what came next. To help you understand why everything turned out the way it did, we need to go back a bit in time. The Miller family, by all outward appearances, was the picture of tradition, upholding reputation, dignity, and all things proper. My father, Robert, was a stern man who believed in order and rules. My mother, Eleanor, was the embodiment of elegance and grace, but she cared deeply about appearances. My sister, Olivia, was always the family's golden girl, beautiful, easygoing, and endlessly pleasing. And me, I was the misfit. From the start, I didn't belong in tea parties or polite social gatherings. I was drawn to precision, to puzzles that needed solving, to boundaries meant to be pushed. I found my place in environments where ambiguity was not tolerated. That's why I chose the military. I joined the armed forces, and later I was recruited into a covert intelligence unit called Vanguard, specializing in black operations. My world changed overnight. I was trained to operate in the shadows, executing missions no one would ever hear about. I loved that work, the challenge, the meaning, the discipline. I was part of numerous critical missions, but two stood out: Black Horizon and a 2016 operation in Syria. In Black Horizon, I was on a team tasked with retrieving highly sensitive intel. The mission was brutal and demanded flawless precision. Then came Syria. I was 28, only 3 months into leading field operations, when a sandstorm hit, far worse than forecasted. Visibility dropped to a meter, our communications failed. Several teammates were trapped under debris. According to intel, the area was supposed to be secure. It wasn't. Daniel Hayes, one of my most trusted teammates, was hit by shrapnel in the leg. 2 others were buried in rubble, lungs filling with dust. Victor Thorne, my commanding officer at HQ, kept relaying orders through a scrambled encrypted line. "Hold your position. Do not move until secondary drone confirms green." I shouted back, "We need to evacuate east. There's a second trap near the chapel entrance." But his voice came again. "Hold the perimeter. Do not move until secondary drone confirms green." I snapped. "I don't have time to wait for confirmation. We're running out of light and blood." Then I cut the comms and led the team out myself. It took 12 minutes. 5 of those were spent dragging Daniel over a pit that had just formed seconds earlier. His blood soaked through my gloves. We barely made it out alive. And I didn't hear from Victor Thorne for 2 whole days. When the report came, he blamed it all on unauthorized deviation, calling my actions reckless improvisation in the field. My record was wiped, my accomplishments erased. The official file claimed the evacuation was coordinated through alternate channels, not by me. They gave me 2 options: disappear quietly with an NDA or face court-martial for insubordination under fire. I signed. I locked myself in a box labeled "Do Not Open." 3 weeks later, Victor Thorne got promoted. They offered me a medal for morale, a symbolic token I could display. I declined. I didn't need symbols. I needed the truth to outlive me. That moment drove a wedge between me and my family that would never be repaired. Under Thorne's influence and the false report, my family believed I had done something shameful. They never asked for my side. They just accepted the official story. Even Olivia, the sister I used to protect from childhood nightmares, drifted away. A birthday message left unanswered was all the confirmation I needed. I had been erased. I became a forbidden topic, a name no longer spoken, a shadow cut from the Miller family's narrative. I disappeared quietly, devoted myself to the work. But the scar remained. And that wedding invitation, with the Miller family printed instead of Audrey, was a brutal reminder that I was still the one left out. So when that tablet buzzed again with a new encrypted message, I knew that no matter how hard they had tried to erase me, fate wasn't finished with me yet. And this time, I wasn't coming back to run. I was coming back to face everything. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early. No one noticed. The drive to the Elms estate took over 4 hours. I left before dawn, my canvas bag tossed into the back seat of a rental car with Maryland plates. The road stretched through rows of crimson trees and fog-wrapped hills, winding into upstate New York like a postcard trying a little too hard. But the beauty did nothing to calm my nerves. My hands stayed locked on the wheel until I pulled into the gravel loop outside the iron gates. The estate looked exactly like something my mother would choose. Grand, but not gaudy. A kind of weathered elegance steeped in golden autumn light. Ivy climbed the stone columns, and staff in crisp black vests greeted guests with rehearsed warmth. I sat in the car for a long time before stepping out, watching women in tailored cocktail dresses laugh beside men in sleek suits, name tags already pinned to their lapels. I entered through the side door. The check-in table sat beneath a crystal chandelier where 2 young women with headsets and flats typed rapidly on silver iPads. A gleaming sign above read, "Miller Davis Wedding, welcome guests." I approached quietly, cautiously. "Name?" one of them asked without looking up. "Audrey Miller." Her fingers paused. She scrolled again, then frowned. "I don't see any Audrey Miller," she said, glancing at her colleague. "Are you with the Davis family?" I gave a small shake of my head. "I'm the bride's sister." A beat passed. Then something flickered in her eyes, embarrassment, or maybe recognition. She typed again, this time more urgently. "Just a moment, please." Within seconds, a supervisor appeared. She didn't ask a single question, only offered a practiced smile and gestured toward the far end of the venue. "This way, Ms. Miller, we've arranged a space for you." No explanation, no apology, just efficient direction. The ballroom wasn't open yet, but the outer foyer buzzed with guests, sipping champagne, admiring flower arrangements, posing for photos in front of a carefully curated family memory wall. None of the photos included me. I was guided past the main reception area to a small alcove with muted fabric chairs. A folded sign marked it as overflow seating. I didn't recognize anyone around me, except a distant cousin I hadn't seen since I was 12. My seat was near the exit, close enough to hear the music, far enough not to disrupt anyone with my presence. The attendant handed me a thin program and disappeared. I sat down, adjusted the lapel of my slate gray coat, muted just as requested, and stared into a room I wasn't allowed to belong in. Eleanor Miller, my mother, entered 15 minutes later, flanked by 2 women from her bridge club. Her hair was swept into a French twist, and she wore a cream suit and pearls. She looked straight past me before the recognition softened her face into something that could almost be called a smile. "Audrey," she said, stepping closer. "You came, I did. You look—" She paused. "Well, thank you for dressing appropriately." There was no hug, just an assessing glance, as if checking whether my presence would ruin the photos. My father, Robert, arrived next, deep in conversation with one of the groomsmen. He spotted me mid-sentence, paused for a heartbeat, then gave a single nod before continuing, as though I were a piece of furniture he'd just walked around. I turned my gaze to the crowd. Distant relatives glided through the space, holding Prosecco and laughing too loudly. Every so often, someone glanced in my direction, then quickly looked away. No one dared to cross the distance built by years and whispers. Olivia appeared 10 minutes later in a sweep of ivory silk and effortless makeup. She was glowing, the kind of bride magazines are made to feature. She passed by my row with her bridesmaids, laughing at something one of them had said. Her eyes swept across the room, paused near me, then moved on. She didn't say hello, didn't stop, didn't even blink. It was as if I wasn't there. I folded the program, ran my finger along the edge, and watched her glide toward the front rows where the real family sat. Her chair was gold-leafed, perfectly centered, lit from above with a flattering beam of light. Mine creaked beneath me, shoved against the emergency exit. I remembered what my father once said at a fundraiser. Family isn't about feelings, it's about appearances. He hadn't been talking to me, but maybe he never really had. A wave of applause rose as the officiant took the podium. I clapped twice, then stopped. My hands rested in my lap, cold and still. The music began. The crowd leaned in. I did not. I scanned the rows of chairs. Somewhere near the middle, a man in a muted gray suit sat with one elbow resting on his knee. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. There was a flicker, like he'd seen a ghost, or recognized something he wasn't supposed to. Then he looked away and vanished into the crowd. Enemies don't always wear masks. Sometimes they serve hors d'oeuvres. A waiter passed by, balancing a tray of rosemary crackers stacked with soft cheese and sliced pear. I watched his gait, not rushed, not lazy, but intentional. He wore the same black uniform as the others, the same polished shoes, the same white gloves. But the left cuff of his sleeve had a faint, off-center crease, and the name on his ID tag didn't match any staff names I'd overheard at the check-in desk. Most people wouldn't notice. I'm not most people. The cocktail hour hadn't even lasted 20 minutes, but something already felt off. The laughter around me was too rehearsed. The centerpiece flowers were too symmetrical. The ceiling LEDs blinked twice, then held steady. It was more than a vibe. It was a signal. I swept my gaze along the perimeter. High ceilings, brass chandeliers, velvet curtains half drawn to reveal rows of blazing red maple trees outside. Warm string quartet music floated in from the corner. The air smelled faintly of nutmeg and scorched sugar. Autumn charm wrapped itself around surveillance geometry. That's when I saw him, Daniel Hayes. He leaned against a marble column near the bar, his hair darker than I remembered. His suit was immaculate, his tie loosened just enough to seem careless. He held a short glass of amber liquid and didn't drink. Our eyes met for less than a second. Then he turned away, disappearing just as another server passed between us. I followed. Near the fireplace, he paused at the charcuterie table, picked up a fig, and said without looking, "Still you under that braid?" I didn't answer. He bit into the fig, chewed once, then added, "Interference everywhere. AV room's been tapped, by someone who knows the language." I found a dummy cable rerouting audio through a proxy filter. The endpoints aren't local. A hum built in my chest. Not panic, not adrenaline, but focus. "Did you see who planted it?" I asked. "Not yet," he finally turned to me, "but you will." My fingers tightened around the scanner in my bag. I moved toward the base of the mobile mic stand near the main stage, where a tall technician in a gray polo was adjusting audio levels. A server approached him, handed off a USB drive, and slipped back toward the kitchen corridor. I walked slowly, syncing my steps to the rhythm of the room. Couples chatted, glasses clinked. The quartet started a new piece, Debussy, if I wasn't mistaken. No one noticed me. I reached the mic rig and pressed my thumb along the side of my bag. A quiet click signaled the compartment opening. Inside was a matte black scanner, no bigger than a lipstick tube. I pointed it at the rear of the mic base and tapped twice. A silent pulse swept through the components. The device buzzed faintly. A green light blinked, then turned red. Not hotel-grade tech. This signal's hopping across frequencies I last saw during Cyprus handoff. The encryption signature mimics DoD voice relay systems, but sloppily. Someone wants it to look official and stay untraceable. I slipped the scanner away. Daniel appeared over my shoulder. "They're not broadcasting, they're receiving." "What's the message?" I asked. He pulled out his phone and tilted the screen toward me. It displayed a looping string of glyphs, encrypted text layered over a countdown timer. "Q transmission was intercepted 10 minutes ago," he said, eyes still on the screen. Then the message changed. "Mr. VT wants confirmation by 1600 hours. 3 letters. VT." My pulse slowed, not from fear, but recognition. Victor Thorne. I hadn't seen that name in 4 years, not since Black Horizon. Not since he walked out of a secure briefing room while I was locked inside, stripped of rank, and told to vanish for the good of the agency. That bastard was here, or watching from wherever he still pulled strings. Thorne doesn't show up unless he's orchestrating something. And if this was his operation, the wedding was just a front. I looked around. Suddenly, every waiter was a suspect. Every floral arrangement could hide a sensor. Every guest might be more than they appeared. "This isn't about Olivia," I murmured. "It never was." Daniel reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small, unremarkable velvet box, the kind that usually held a lapel pin or cufflinks. He pressed it into my hand. "Temporary authority reinstated," he said softly. "Your call, General. Even silk can hide betrayal." The bridal suite was too quiet. Candlelight flickered in ornate wall sconces, releasing the scent of rosewood and vanilla. Fabric rustled somewhere near the vanity, but otherwise, there was silence, tense, taut, the kind that belongs to someone alone but not at peace. Olivia stood before the full-length mirror, turned slightly, inspecting her reflection in a gown that looked woven from moonlight. Layers of cream silk floated around her like mist. The veil hadn't been pinned yet. From a distance, her hands seemed steady, but they trembled as she adjusted a strap. I closed the door behind me without knocking. The latch clicked like a rifle bolt. Her eyes met mine in the mirror. Surprise flashed, then vanished. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, slowly turning. "You're not supposed to be transmitting encrypted intel through your dress," I replied. Her mouth opened, then closed. A dozen expressions crossed her face: confusion, outrage, denial, but one soaked through more than the rest: fear. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I said firmly. "I've already traced the signal." She hesitated, and for a moment she wasn't a bride. She was a sister again. Her shoulders curled inward, her eyes wide like they used to be when she'd sneak into my room after childhood nightmares. "Do you think I'd do something like that on purpose?" "I think you were used." Olivia swallowed. Her voice dropped. "Someone gave the dress to me through the designer, said it was a gift, exclusive, custom-made. It was beautiful. I didn't think to ask." I stepped beside her, careful not to touch the silk. "Who arranged the designer?" "A sponsor Ethan's firm works with. Said it was part of the wedding package. She trailed off. "I just accepted it." Her shoulders sagged. "Don't make me feel worse than I already do." I looked into her eyes through the mirror and said, "Let me see the hem." "No." Her hand flinched toward the edge of the gown. "This is my wedding, Audrey. I don't care what agency you think you're still working for. You're not here as a field agent," she snapped. "Exactly. You're nothing anymore." The words landed with the weight she intended, but they didn't cut deep, not this time. I waited, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch until her fury drained out. Then in a voice barely audible, she asked, "There's something wrong with it, isn't there?" "Yes." She hesitated, then slowly stepped back, lifted the hem of the gown, and held it out toward me. I knelt, fingers precise, pushing past layers of tulle until I reached the inner seam. There, sewn into the lining with metallic thread, tucked behind a fold designed to move with the fabric, was a signal transmitter. The size of a thumbtack, military encrypted, the kind used for passive data collection in wearable field tech. I pulled out my scanner and held it close, a gentle pulse, active. Olivia collapsed onto the velvet bench, head in hands. "I didn't tell you because I thought you'd ruin everything," she said, her voice shaking like it always had. I stood, the transmitter held between my fingers, glittering like a diseased jewel in the candlelight. "No, Olivia," I said quietly. "I'm here to save it. Again." No one stood up for me until one man did. Music swelled as the double doors opened. I remained in the back row, the cold edge of the bench pressing against my spine. Candlelight shimmered over polished marble, casting shifting gold down the aisle. Guests leaned forward with trained poise, smartphones half hidden behind floral programs. This was the kind of wedding built for magazine spreads and whispered envy. Perfect symmetry, carefully curated elegance, a flawless illusion. Olivia walked into the sound of strings. Her arm looped through our father's. Her dress trailed behind her in a stream of silk, radiant and pure, now cleansed of the thread it once carried. She didn't look at me. He didn't either. Eleanor rose as they passed, her expression a portrait of quiet triumph. The guests stood too. I remained seated. From where I sat near the aisle, I saw it all: the strained smiles, the proud glances, the sparkle of champagne flutes lifted with restrained anticipation. And behind it all, nestled in the second row of the VIP section, sat a man I hadn't seen in 4 years, Victor Thorne. His hair was shorter now, touched with gray. His body looked relaxed, but his eyes were alert, predatory, even in silk. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He knew I had seen him. The officiant stepped up, voice warm and practiced. "Before we begin this union," he said, "we'd like to take a moment to honor those who have served. If there are any veterans in the room who wish to stand, we welcome you to do so." Silence followed. Then from 3 rows ahead, one figure slowly rose: Daniel. His suit was sharp, his loosened tie just civilian enough. But when he turned, slowly and deliberately, his eyes locked onto mine, and the room shifted. Whispers cut off. The music softened. The air hummed, like something unseen was being stretched too tight. He raised his hand in a clean, precise salute, fingers to brow, posture steady as stone. And then, with quiet authority, he spoke. "Brigadier General Audrey Miller, ma'am." My breath caught, not from surprise, but from the weight of it. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Heads turned, a phone slipped to the floor. Someone gasped. The officiant blinked mid-sentence. Cameras swiveled toward me like hunting dogs catching scent. But they found no fear, only steel. My mother's face twisted, not in confusion, but recognition, like a locked drawer in her mind had finally creaked open. My father looked as if someone had slapped him. And Olivia, at last, looked at me, not past me, at me. I stood, not slowly, not carefully. I let the silence stretch as I stepped into the aisle. Each heel strike on marble echoed like thunder, every step deliberate, inevitable. Victor Thorne's eyes finally lifted to meet mine, cold, measured, unblinking. I didn't look away. I didn't have to. "This isn't over, Victor," I said, my voice clear and cutting. "It's just beginning." They buried the story, but not the scars. The private lounge behind the wedding hall was dimly lit, its walls lined with sepia-toned portraits of ancestors I'd never met. Stern men in top hats, women with lace collars and distant eyes. The room was soundproofed. Somewhere beyond the padded walls, orchestral music still played for a wedding I no longer considered my own. I sat in a worn leather armchair, staring at the velvet box Daniel had handed me earlier. It rested unopened on a side table beside an untouched glass of champagne. The air held the scent of old wood, faint flowers, and something metallic beneath it all. Maybe old blood in the plumbing, or the iron weight of memory. I let my fingers touch the box once, then twice, before finally flipping it open. The metal was still there, real, solid, deep red around the edges, bright silver across a cross-hatched beam. I had refused it once, Syria, 2016. The sandstorm had come in harder than forecasted. Visibility down to a single meter, comms scrambled. Several teammates were trapped beneath broken concrete and twisted rebar. We weren't even supposed to be there. Our intel had flagged the zone as secure. It wasn't. Daniel had taken shrapnel to the leg. 2 others were buried, lungs full of dust. I was 28, 3 months into my first field command. Victor Thorne was back in the command vehicle, issuing garbled orders over a broken encrypted channel, 3 syllables at a time. I remember shouting into the mic, "Evacuate east, there's a second trap near the church entrance." His voice came back, "Hold perimeter, do not move until secondary drone confirms green." I snapped, "We don't have time to wait for confirmation. We're running out of light and blood." I cut the feed and led them out myself. It took 12 minutes. 5 of those were spent dragging Daniel across a pit that hadn't existed 30 seconds earlier. His blood soaked through my gloves. We made it out, barely. I didn't hear a single word from Victor Thorne for the next 48 hours. Then came the report. He blamed the failure on unauthorized deviation, labeled my actions as reckless field improvisation. My record was wiped. My achievements buried. The official file claimed the extraction was coordinated through alternate channels, not mine. I was given a choice: disappear quietly under NDA or face court-martial for disobedience under fire. I signed, folded myself into a box labeled "Do Not Open." Victor Thorne got promoted 3 weeks later. They asked if I wanted a medal for morale, something symbolic, a replica to display. I refused. I didn't need symbols. I needed the truth to outlive me. And yet, 6 years later, there I was staring at the real thing. The one they said had been lost in audit. My fingers curled tight. Daniel knocked once before slipping in. He said nothing, just nodded and handed me a phone. The black screen lit up with cascading lines of code, metadata pulled from the transmitter we'd extracted from Olivia's dress. I scanned the strings, hex signatures, encryption logs, outbound destinations. Then I saw it. Vanguard backup.exe, scheduled for deletion at 22 IST, Red House. Red House, one of the last secure archives, buried offline until someone decided it was time to burn it down. I scrolled to the bottom of the metadata. The sender's access key ended in 3 digits I hadn't seen in years. VTR09, Thorne. He wasn't just attending this wedding. He was exploiting it, coordinating a full erasure of everything tied to Vanguard. Every log, every comm, every sliver of truth from Black Horizon to now. I stood too fast, vision narrowing. If he succeeded tonight, there would be no record of what I did, or what he did, not just for me, but for all of us. I moved toward the door, adrenaline prickling under my skin. Then a whisper from the hallway. Audrey, you're not the only ghost at this wedding. Not every toast is harmless. The rooftop of the Elms estate shimmered under a lattice of string lights, strung between trees like the glowing veins of fireflies. Soft jazz floated from hidden speakers, smooth enough to lull the unalert. Tables were cleared, drinks topped off, and somewhere inside, a wedding coordinator was checking her clipboard for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Daniel stood near a trellis, pretending to sip a drink. I was 3 steps away, eyes fixed on the ceremonial microphone neatly placed at the head of the outdoor table. A single red rose lay beside it. Aesthetic symmetry or strategic placement? I'd learned not to assume innocence in beautiful things. The microphone had been moved since the ceremony, now closer, rewired. The frequency scanner in my bag gave off a low, steady hum. Buried deep in its core was a hidden signal device, nearly indistinguishable from standard wireless components. I switched the scanner to passive mode and waited. Olivia stood beneath the arch, glass raised, veil lifted for the first time all day. Her new husband stood behind her, smiling like a man proud of possession. I just want to say, she began, her voice soft through the mic, that love, real love, surprises you. It doesn't always come planned. It sneaks in and anchors itself where you least expect. Polite laughter, glasses clinked. I didn't hear the rest. Because just then, the scanner buzzed, sharp and short. A data burst, 3 seconds long, narrow band directed to an endpoint I hadn't seen in a decade. I tapped the interface. The signal logged. Beside me, Daniel's voice was low but cutting. Tell me that's not what I think it is. It is. I pressed deeper. Metadata analyzed faster now, with my algorithm loaded. Layer by layer, the structure unraveled. Familiar encryption tags, operational command headers, distorted. As if someone had taken the original Vanguard logs and ran them through a blender of legal ambiguity and falsified timestamps. I swiped to isolate the core payload. Directive 1, Officer OM. Unauthorized engagement, failure to verify secondary evac protocol. Override of chain of command. Outcome, civilian exposure risk. Jesus, Daniel whispered. They're rewriting it, framing you. I know, I said, in real time. The transmission had passed through a passive relay, harmless to an untrained ear, but beneath it, it was pushing a narrative, feeding a version of history designed to burn me out of existence. Where did it land? I asked. He hesitated. Bounced through 3 proxies, final nodes political, registered under the ARC initiative. That name chilled my spine. Caldwell. Daniel nodded once. His fingerprints are all over it. He wants your legacy buried. Victor's exalted. And if this rewrite sticks, he'll get exactly that. The jazz music shifted to an upbeat rhythm. I looked at Olivia, laughing now with bridesmaids, her champagne glass nearly empty. She looked content, or maybe just well-practiced. The way I used to look when briefing in war zones and calling it Tuesday. My eyes returned to the mic, to that little black mesh that had carried a bullet through my past, and cloaked it in pleasantries. Footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate. I turned just as Olivia approached. No veil, no champagne. Her voice was quiet. Why are you sneaking around at my wedding? Some secrets are sewn in, others are stitched back open. The bridal dressing room was nearly dark, lit only by a sliver of hallway light slipping beneath the door. The candles had long since burned out. Makeup brushes lay scattered across the vanity like discarded weapons after a failed siege. The gown hung on a wooden mannequin in the corner, limp now, its beauty collapsed and abandoned. I closed the door behind me with the faintest click, then walked to the mannequin. The dress stood like a ghost, hem brushing the floor. I crouched, pulled gloves from my blazer pocket, and slid them on. Every inch of silk had been tailored to perfection, but I was searching for imperfections, puckered seams along the hip, tight thread beneath lace overlays. I pulled a scalpel from my bag, made a clean, precise cut along the inner lining, revealing a thin muslin envelope sewn beneath a false layer. I peeled it back slowly, exposing a surgically stitched bundle the size of a coin. The casing was smooth, unmarked, just 3 tiny studs and a low electric hum. A NATO-grade data module, heat map, motion tracking, and worse, a passive relay. It had captured everything Olivia did, said, or stepped through, funneling it into a burst stream embedded within the ceremony's audio feed. The microphone wasn't a one-off. It was part of a loop. I reached for the decoder, slid a cable from its casing, and connected the payload to the reader. Green light, then red, then green again. The data poured in like thin black rivers, metadata headers, signal logs, signature integrity, all tagged with obfuscation protocols. And there, buried deep in the signature field like a stained calling card, was a hex string. MRCO4FGR, Thorne, not a reference, a signature. This wasn't an old op reused. This was live, current. And they had sewn it into my sister's wedding dress, like a weapon made of tulle. Audrey, I turned, still crouched, scalpel in one hand, decoder in the other. Olivia stood in the doorway, her hair had come loose, makeup slightly smudged. Her eyes found the gown, then the torn lining, then me. "What are you doing?" Her voice caught. "Finishing what someone else started," I said, slowly rising. "You're cutting apart my wedding dress," she snapped. It was never just a dress. She stepped closer, disbelief melting into fury. "You always ruin everything, always. Every time I let my guard down, you show up with that face, like I'm a fool who needs saving." I didn't answer. "Just once," she said louder. "Just once I wanted something that wasn't about you, not your job, not your secrets, not your guilt." "This isn't about guilt," I swallowed. "You didn't plant this," I said, holding up the module. "They did, and they used you to carry it in." Her eyes dropped to the device in my hand, then to the torn silk. She stepped back, spine hitting the vanity. "They used me," she whispered, "because they knew I'd show up." She collapsed onto the velvet chair, all resistance gone. "I felt it," she said. "Wearing that dress, I felt watched. I told Ethan something was wrong. He laughed, said I was just nervous." She looked up at me, voice almost gone. "You were right." Silence stretched between us. "So what now?" I raised the decoder, watching the final line of code being processed. A new timestamp appeared, live countdown. Another data drop was incoming. I tapped my earpiece. "Daniel, do you copy?" "Static then. Copy." "This confirms it. Victor Thorne is working with Caldwell. The real transfer is happening tonight." The speech was beautiful, the betrayal better scripted. The ballroom glowed under 1,000 candle reflections, chandeliers blurred into soft gold, turning every smile into something polished. Applause thundered across the room like staged lightning, and glasses clinked in near-perfect unison. The air was thick with post-toast warmth, sweet wine, heavy enough to fog suspicion. Victor Thorne stood at the center, raising his glass. "I'd like to offer a toast," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Not just to the happy couple, though they deserve every blessing, but to the ones who raised them. The Miller family. A name that stands for loyalty, honor, quiet strength." More applause. Eleanor dabbed her eyes, visibly moved. Robert nodded with patriarchal pride. Olivia stared at her hands, uncertain. And finally, Victor continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "To those who serve without recognition, the guardians in the dark, may we someday earn the silence they've given us." That last line landed like poetry, half-truth wrapped in reverence. The room erupted in cheers. I was already moving. Daniel nodded to me from across the floor. A flick of his wrist, a pulse from the hidden remote in his jacket. We'd seized control of the AV feed 30 seconds before Thorne took the mic. All I had to do now was activate it. My hand slid into my bag, one touch on the transmitter. The room went dark. A gasp rippled across the guests as the wedding slideshow blinked out. The screen flickered once, twice, then burst to life in monochrome code overlaying a familiar header. Vanguard Backup.exe. Source, Red House. Signed, MRC04FGR. Murmurs swept the crowd. Then the audio kicked in. My voice from the decoder played aloud. "The real transfer is happening tonight." Silence. Victor Thorne's glass lowered. "Who did this?" someone whispered. Then he turned, perfect confusion on his face. "What is this?" he said, stepping toward the screen. "This isn't part of the program." His performance was flawless. "Someone's breached the system," he continued, voice edged with appropriate alarm. "This is classified content. It could endanger lives." "Like mine," I said loudly, stepping forward. All eyes turned to me. This is what they buried, what they tried to erase. And they used this family, my family, as a shield. Dozens of cameras turned, phones raised. I could see confusion turning to questions. Then Thorne pulled the real trigger. From inside his jacket, he produced a slim leather folder. "I'm sorry," he said, voice grave, "but this is exactly what we feared." He handed the folder to the venue's security team. A federal cease and detain order. She accessed sealed archives through a compromised private channel. "We have reason to believe." He tried to say more, but I cut in. "They tried to erase me. I digitized the truth." The private security wing behind the ballroom felt like the end of something, not the beginning. Edges too sharp, lights too sterile, tile floors too clean to be real. Outside, applause and suspicion still echoed. Aftershocks from the video now replaying on half the guests' phones. Inside, Victor Thorne hunched in a faux leather armchair, shoulders tight, eyes calculating. Caldwell stood off to the side, silent, clutching his phone but not using it. The man hadn't said a word since the live feed aired. His career was bleeding out, and he knew it. Victor spoke first, voice low and taut. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped. "You gave her too much rope. You think that footage can't be explained?" Daniel leaned against the far wall, arms folded. "The footage is just the start. The data packets, the altered logs. You were rewriting ops in real time and counting on no one noticing." Victor's face twisted. "She's unstable," he said, jabbing a finger toward me. "Always has been. Black Horizon broke her. You know that? She violated protocol. Operated solo. This isn't about truth. It's about ego." "No," I said. "It's about ghosts. The kind you thought would never claw their way out of the mud." I opened a file on the old laptop. One of 3 I'd handed off to Echo and her team weeks ago, anticipating fallout just like this. "Log 47B, I said. Timestamp 7 minutes before the Vanguard breach, internal campaign chatter. I hit play. Victor's voice crackled through the speaker, real-time comms, unedited. "Let the team hold. If it goes south, she'll eat it. No point in burning the whole command chain." Another voice, logistics. "That's still an active civilian zone. We don't even have confirmation of..." Victor again. "She signed the override. She takes the heat." I looked up. "My team nearly died because you decided my name made a more convenient grave than admitting your own failure." Caldwell stepped back half a pace, his face the perfect portrait of sudden moral discomfort. I didn't authorize." "You didn't have to," I said. "You just looked away while he built the lie." A soft siren wailed in the distance, not urgent, but final. Outside, guests were calmly directed to remain indoors. Phones buzzed again as verified media accounts lit up. Major General Audrey Miller exposes federal intel forgery. Victor Thorne under investigation. Then a knock at the door. 2 men in black suits stepped inside. Their jackets bore no insignia, but their faces were sharp with certainty. One, tall and square-jawed, pulled a folded document from his breast pocket. "Victor Thorne," he said, voice steady. "You're under federal investigation for obstruction of justice and falsification of national defense intelligence." Victor opened his mouth. I saw the shift begin, the outrage, the fury, the classic Thorne misdirection. It never came. Because standing just behind the agents, my father, Robert, appeared in the doorway. He was looking at me, not past me, not through me, at me. He opened his mouth like he might say something, but didn't. He just watched as they took Victor's wrist, cuffed him, and read him the rest of his rights. This time, no one looked away. I used to live outside the frame. This time, I'd been called to the center. The chaos had ebbed like the tide retreating into a sea sponge. The ballroom was quiet now, save for the occasional clink of silverware being cleared away, and the soft murmurs of guests adjusting their understanding of this wedding. Outside, the autumn sunset cast long amber shadows across the patio's damp bricks, still wet from the morning's rain. The photographer hovered awkwardly near the flower arch, camera half raised, glancing between me and the rest of the family. She hesitated, then approached Olivia carefully. "Would you like just the immediate family?" she asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. Olivia didn't even glance at her. "She's in this one," she said firmly, turning toward me. "This isn't a performance." Her voice didn't shake. She meant it. I kept my coat closed against the chill, adrenaline draining from my limbs like thawing ice. The world hadn't stopped turning after Victor Thorne's arrest, but its axis had shifted. I felt it in the way people looked at me now. not as a question, but as an answer they hadn't known they were missing. Eleanor stood a few feet away, unnaturally still. She hadn't spoken since the agents led Victor away. Now she stepped forward. Her hand reached out, almost involuntarily, smoothing a wrinkle on my coat. "You're creased," she murmured. I didn't respond. Neither did she, but her fingers lingered on the fabric a second too long, stroking something invisible. Robert came next, more hesitant. He looked older in the twilight, slightly smaller. "I saw what you did," he said, eyes fixed somewhere near my shoulder. "All this time, I never really saw you at all." I didn't offer forgiveness. I just nodded once. The photographer gestured for us to gather. Daniel stood at a slight distance, arms crossed, watching with the faintest hint of a smile. Olivia took center position, bouquet tucked under her arm. Then she extended her hand deliberately, not politely, toward me. "Audrey," she said, "come stand by me." So I stepped in. The camera clicked. It was a simple moment, no trumpet blast, no sweeping speech of reconciliation, just 4 people standing in a place they hadn't stood together in years, all of us blinking into the lens, as if uncertain who would appear in the photo. But I was there, in the center. Olivia leaned in as the camera adjusted for another frame. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "For not letting me marry a lie. I've stormed safe houses. This dinner scared me more." The Miller family kitchen looked almost unchanged. Sunlight sliced across the marble island in perfect squares. Cinnamon rolls cooled on the wire rack. The old brass faucet still dripped now and then. The space was warm, but not just from the oven. There was a softness in the air today, something that hadn't existed in these walls for years. Or maybe I'd never stayed long enough to notice it. I sat at the far end of the table, in the same corner seat I used to slip into as a teenager. Quiet, half invisible, always close to the exit. I hadn't chosen it this time. Olivia had pulled the chair out and smiled, nodding at me without a word. Daniel sat beside me, collar unbuttoned, hands wrapped around his coffee mug like it was anchoring him to something real. He belonged here now too, in that strange space between operative and whatever it is we were learning to become. And somehow, it didn't feel out of place. Across from us, Eleanor poured coffee like nothing had happened the night before, like her daughter hadn't exposed a decades-old cover-up in front of a senator and half the Catskills elite. She placed a cup in front of me carefully, already laced with cream, the way I used to drink it before war, and debriefing stripped the taste from my mouth. Robert was unusually quiet, spreading butter on his toast like it was a task of national precision. Occasionally, his eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. We talked awkwardly about the weather, the venue, the DJ who refused to return after last night. We laughed a little, not the deep kind, but the kind that keeps things from cracking. Then the front door creaked open. Small footsteps pattered across the hardwood floor, and a little girl, no older than 7, peeked around the kitchen doorway with a shy smile. Her hair was pale, braided into twin pigtails. A blue ribbon slipped from her shoulder like a loose thread. "Hi," she said softly. Olivia stood, her voice gentle. "Audrey, this is Lily, Ethan's niece. She stayed over last night." Lily tiptoed closer, holding something small in her hands, a daisy-shaped pin, embroidered fabric with tiny pearl beads in the center. "My dad said you're the reason he came home," she said, stepping toward me with the honesty only a child can offer. My throat tightened. I didn't reach for the pin right away. Instead, I looked at her, really looked, and saw in her the fearless grace of someone who hadn't yet been taught to question silence. I took the daisy, pinned it carefully to my lapel, and smiled. "Well then," I said, gently patting her hand, "your dad must be a good man." She beamed and darted out of the kitchen, her ribbon trailing behind her like the tail of a comet. Eleanor handed me a fresh cinnamon roll without saying a word. Her eyes were shining but steady, full of things she wasn't ready to say, but no longer denying. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. This time, they didn't shake. The moment held, quiet and intact. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to justify my seat at this table. I simply existed. And somehow, that was enough. Daniel nudged my elbow, his voice low but pointed. "Ever think about writing your story down?" I looked at him, because now, the story was mine again. History had almost erased me. But I've learned to write in ink. The marble rotunda blazed in the late morning light, each beam catching the brass nameplates lining the curved walls, glowing like long-buried embers. There were no banners, no orchestra, just a modest wooden podium, a lowered flag, and a crowd that needed no spectacle to understand the weight of the moment. Folding chairs lined the chamber, half filled with uniforms, half with civilians whose eyes carried stories they'd never put into words. I stood behind the podium, both palms flat against the wood, grounding myself. The microphone gave a soft buzz before falling still, expectant. I never needed my name in a report, I said, my voice calm but clear. I needed the people I saved to live. There was no applause, not yet, just a silence that leaned in to listen. For years I lived in the dark, not because I was afraid, but because the job required it, and because I believed, perhaps wrongly, that the people closest to me could live without knowing who I had become. I looked down for a moment, then back up. That silence protected missions, but it also protected lies. And when the truth became inconvenient for some, erasing me was easier than facing what had really happened. But the truth has weight. It doesn't float away, it waits, and eventually, it lands. In the second row, I saw Daniel, arms crossed, eyes unwavering. Beside him, Olivia lifted her phone, the red light blinking as she live-streamed the moment on her podcast. Scattered behind them, I recognized fragments of my past. Former Vanguard agents seated without rank, but not without respect. A nod from Echo, a small salute from Lily. Faces etched by silence, now finally acknowledged. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and raised the metal piece. Not a replica, the original. Deep crimson and silver, burnished by time, by unnecessary delay, by memory. They told me Vanguard didn't exist, that what we did had no name. Today, that changes. I turned, gesturing to the newly unveiled plaque along the memorial wall, its bronze seal gleaming where emptiness had once lived. Beneath it, carved in stone, Operation Vanguard, Black Horizon Division, confirmed and archived, 2023. There was a beat of stillness, then a ripple. The first to rise was a young officer in dress blues. He stood slowly, saluted with precision, and spoke words I hadn't heard in years. "Welcome home, Director." One by one, the others followed, a standing ovation. No fanfare, just the quiet sound of feet on polished tile, of hands finding each other in steady applause. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. I stepped down from the podium and walked the curve of the rotunda, past the wall where names endure. Mine was near the center, not bolded, not underlined, but unshakable. Below it, in smaller script, "Sometimes silence saves lives, but truth saves nations." I exhaled slowly, not erased, not forgotten, simply, finally, rewritten, in ink. Victor Thorne once buried my story beneath redacted lines and falsified reports. But in the end, Audrey stood in daylight, her name carved in stone, while his was stamped on an arrest warrant. Justice doesn't roar. It whispers, through every salute, every truth reclaimed. Like the last note of an anthem long muted. And when the truth finally spoke, the whole room rose to listen.